The first sign of trouble wasn't the flak. It was the contrails slipping away. High over Germany in the summer of 1943, a formation of B-17s turns for home, white tracks arcing west toward England. Inside one of those fortresses, the pilot glances out the side window and feels his stomach sink. The formation is pulling ahead. "Power's already at climb," he mutters. "She just doesn't want to go any faster." This isn't a normal B-17F. It's a YB-40, one of the new gunship fortresses. 16 50 caliber machine guns bristle from nose, back, sides, and tail. Ammo boxes are crammed everywhere. The bomb bay that once held tons of explosives now holds belts of cartridges. On paper, it's a flying destroyer. In practice, it's heavy. Very heavy. The flight engineer checks manifold pressure and RPM again, knowing it won't change. "We're at max continuous," he says. "Any more and we'll cook the engines before we hit the channel." In the nose, the gunner swivels in his new chin turret, glass bubble giving him a wide view ahead. He can still see the main bomber stream, dozens of fortresses in staggered combat boxes, their own guns flashing at distant specks. Those specks are German fighters, Bf-109s and FW-190s, testing the formation, looking for weak spots. For months, Luftwaffe pilots have heard rumors about these new American porcupine fortresses. Some who attacked them in formation have flown into unexpected curtains of tracers. But every rumor has the same warning. Don't hit them when they're buried in the herd. The herd is now miles ahead. "Ship, we're drifting back," the tail gunner calls. "I can see clear sky between us and the last element." The pilot watches the distance grow and feels the weight of every gun, every ammo box, every extra armor plate. "Roger," he says at last. "Keep your eyes open. They'll see us." On the ground below, German radar tracks the retreating bombers. Controllers vector fighter Gruppen into position. Somewhere in that calm radio chatter, one note stands out. One fortress lagging, alone. The first pair of fighters rolls over into a dive. For weeks, German pilots have complained that the new gunship B-17s are too dangerous to approach in the usual way. Now they're being handed a gift, a flying hedgehog stripped of its friends. The YB-40's pilot watches the formation shrink to a pale smudge and feels the hair rise on the back of his neck. 16 guns or not, a fortress alone is still just one airplane. And a lot of Germans are about to see if this one really is untouchable. The idea behind the YB-40 didn't start with a love of extra guns. It started with fear of empty sky. In 1942, when the first B-17s of the 8th Air Force arrived in England, they brought a theory: daylight precision bombing. Tight formations of heavily armed bombers would punch into enemy territory, hit targets accurately, and fight off. Fighters with sheer firepower. The Boeing B-17 fit that vision, big, four-engined, bristling with machine guns. Early models had only a few 30 caliber guns. Later E and F models gained up to 13 50s. Top turret, ball turret, waist guns, tail, and nose. In training films, combat boxes of 18 or 20 fortresses overlapped their arcs of fire so tightly that any attacking fighter should have been shredded. Then, the war pushed deeper. In late 1942 and early 1943, the 8th Air Force hit targets farther inside German-held territory: Rouen, Wilhelmshaven, Schweinfurt, Regensburg. The deeper they went, the more fighters the Luftwaffe massed. German pilots adapted fast. Instead of timid individual attacks, they launched coordinated head-on passes, FW-190s and BF-109s, diving through the front of the formations, where the B-17 was weakest, then looping back for more. Casualties on missions like Schweinfurt-Regensburg were brutal. Some groups lost around 20% of their aircraft in a day. Empty bunks and new gaps in squadron photos became routine. One analysis circulated quietly. More than half of bombers shot down had, at some point, left formation. An engine failed, a cable was cut, a pilot lagged in a turn. Once alone, even a well-armed fortress could be attacked from all sides by fighters taking turns. Formation was life. And there was another problem: range. American escort fighters, P-47, Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings couldn't yet escort the bombers to the deepest targets and back. They covered part of the route, then had to turn home for fuel, leaving long stretches where bombers flew alone, protected only by their own guns and tight formation flying. Someone asked the desperate question, what if the bombers had their own escorts? Not fighters, there weren't enough long-range ones yet. But what if some B-17s gave up their bombs and became flying gun platforms? Heavy escorts that could fly at the same speed and altitude inside the formation and pump out enough fire to keep fighters at bay. If one flying fortress was dangerous, maybe a super fortress loaded with guns would be even better. That idea led to drawings, workshops, and, eventually, the airplane now struggling to keep up over Germany. On paper, a B-17 looks like bad news for any fighter pilot. 4 engines, armor, thick wing spars, and guns everywhere. Stories circulate about fortresses limping home with one engine, a shredded tail, and holes you can crawl through. But underneath that toughness, it's still a bomber. Big, relatively slow, and forced to fly straight and level on the bomb run so the bombardier can aim. Fighter pilots live for that. From a cockpit, a bomber formation looks like a moving wall of metal. The trick is to crack it, not admire it. Head-on attacks made use of high closing speeds. Gunners had only seconds to fire. Other tactics used high rear quarter dives, rolling through wake turbulence, firing, then diving away, before the defensive fire found them. Inside, the crew felt every tactic. Nose gunners held their nerve as fighters swelled from dots to snarling shapes. Waist gunners snapped from target to target. Tail gunners watched contrails and called "Bandit at 6" high as black crosses grew. Even with all that fire, fighters still held the initiative. They chose where, when, and how to attack. And when something went wrong and a bomber fell behind, the world changed. Friendly tails dwindled, then vanished. The sky grew huge and empty. That's when fighters, wary of the formation's crossfire, came back alone or in pairs to finish off the straggler. Stories of crews fighting to the last round in burning, isolated fortresses filled debriefs and mess halls early in 1943. At 8th Air Force HQ, they hardened into a conclusion. If bombers are going to fight without escorts, give them every edge you can. Enter the flying destroyer. Engineers didn't start from scratch. They started with a B-17F. At Boeing and modification centers in the States, one standard fortress became the prototype XB-40. Once the concept looked workable, more airframes were converted to YB-40 gunship standard. The goal? Turn a bomber into a heavily armed escort. First target, the B-17's weakness to head-on attacks. Early F models had only a couple of flexible nose and cheek guns. So the mod team added a powered Bendix chin turret with twin 50s under the nose. Cheek guns were restored and improved, giving the bombardier and navigator more forward bite. Next, up top. The main top turret behind the cockpit stayed, but a second manned turret went in near the radio room, giving overlapping coverage of the upper hemisphere. The waist guns were doubled. Instead of one, .50 per side, the YB-40 carried twin guns in each waist window, 4 barrels sweeping the flanks. With the ball turret below and twin-tail guns, the total reached 16 .50 caliber machine guns. Feeding them took weight. The bomb bay, once full of bombs, became an ammo magazine, stacked with boxes and chutes. A normal bomber might carry 4,000, 5,000 rounds. A YB-40 hauled more than twice that. Extra armor went around key crew positions and systems. When the first gunship rolled out, it looked like a B-17 that had hit the gym and skipped leg day. Crew's reactions were mixed. Gunners loved it. 1650s, Jerry's gonna hate this. Pilots were wary. Test flights showed climb performance had dropped sharply. Reaching 20,000 feet now took roughly twice as long as a standard fortress, but there was no time to wait for perfection. A small batch of YB-40s crossed the Atlantic in early 1943 and joined the 327th Bomb Squadron, 92nd Bomb Group, at RAF Alconbury. They got names and nose art like any other bomber, Tampa Tornado, Wango Wango, and were plugged into mission plans. The concept was simple. Mix a few YB-40s into each combat box, especially in the lead and vulnerable tail elements, and let them boost the defensive firepower. What no one yet knew was that the same weight and armor that made them monstrous gun platforms would also make them a liability. The first real test came at the end of May 1943. In the briefing room at Alconbury, red string on the map traced a line to Saint-Nazaire on the French Atlantic coast, U-boat pens, and a flak-ringed harbor. "Flak heavy, fighter opposition expected," the intel officer said. "These positions here, and here are YB-40s, extra cover on the way in." On takeoff, the difference was obvious. Fully fueled and stuffed with ammunition, the YB-40s used more runway and climbed sluggishly. Standard B-17Fs, loaded with bombs but less armor and ammo, climbed more eagerly. Eventually, though, the group formed up, contrails crossing as they reached altitude. Over France, German fighters appeared high and off to one side, then swung in. "Bandits, 3 o'clock high." FW-190s dove at the lead boxes, and this time the formation's front edge bit back harder. The YB-40's chin turrets and boosted nose guns threw a dense cone of fire at head-on attackers. Top and radio room turrets joined in. At least one fighter broke away trailing smoke. Others diverted around the worst of the crossfire, hunting for softer edges. Back in debrief, YB-40 crews claimed several fighters destroyed and more damaged. The gunships had clearly made the front of the formation a tougher nut to crack. For a moment, the idea seemed justified. Then, the bombs fell. Standard B-17s opened their bay doors, dropped their loads, and suddenly weighed several thousand pounds less. With lighter weight, their engines could maintain formation speed more easily. Climb and handling improved. The YB-40s dropped nothing. Their bomb bays were still piled with ammo. Their turrets and armor still dragged at the air. As the group turned for home, and the lead pushed the throttles a little to the right, the gunships found themselves sliding backward, throttles already high. "Close it up," the leader called. They tried. Some YB-40s stayed in position, others began drifting toward the rear of the box. That's how this particular 16-gun fortress wound up where we met it, watching the others recede and realizing it was becoming exactly what it had been built to protect against: a straggler. Minor flak damage over the target hadn't helped. One engine a little hot, another leaking oil. To stay with the formation, the pilot would have had to run past the red line. He chose not to. Now the air was making the choice for him. As the main formation shrank to glittering specks, the crew's voices on interphone sounded too loud. "How we doing, boss?" the top turret gunner asked. "We're doing fine," the pilot lied. "Stay sharp." In the tail, the gunner scanned the contrails. He knew the German routine: hit the main box hard, then pick off the cripples. This time, the cripple just happened to be the toughest-looking fortress in the sky. "She may be slow," the radio room gunner said, patting the wall, "but she's got teeth." He was right. The chin turret covered the front. 2 dorsal turrets overlapped above. Waist guns swept the sides. The ball turret watched the belly. The tail guarded 6 o'clock. Ammo belts fed every gun. Spare barrels waited in racks. If any bomber could stand alone, it should be this one. The fighters came in carefully. From their cockpits, the straggling fortress looked different. Extra turrets, more blisters. Some pilots had already learned to respect that silhouette, but alone was alone. An FW-190 made the first pass from high 6 o'clock, staying a bit farther out. The tail gunner opened up, long, steady tracer lines reaching back. As the fighter broke, top and radio room turrets joined in. Waist guns raked his turn. "Got hits!" someone shouted as smoke puffed from the wing root. The 190 slid away, losing altitude. Another pair came low and left, climbing up into the fortress's underside. The ball turret and left waist guns answered with a wall of fire. One fighter flinched away, the other bored in, cannons spitting. The YB-40 shuddered as rounds slammed into the right wing. A panel peeled off. Hydraulic fluid misted the waist. An engine coughed before the pilot stabilized it. "Everybody still here?" he called. Affirmatives came back, some steady, some too quick. Attacks continued, singles, pairs, one moment that looked like 4 at once until 2 peeled off, unwilling to fly straight into the crisscrossing 50 cal fire. Brass piled on the floor, barrels smoked and were swapped out. Gunners shouted ranges and corrections. Once, for a few seconds, it felt like they were winning. A BF-109 tried a shallow diagonal pass from 11 o'clock high, misjudged the nose arc, and flew too close. The chin gunner tracked him smoothly and hosed the canopy. The fighter rolled onto its back, trailing black smoke, and fell away. The cheer died as a fresh burst of cannon fire ripped through the tail. "Rudder's sluggish," the co-pilot warned. "We've got cable damage." The pilot hauled on the controls, trimming and muscling the fortress along, feeling it respond more slowly. After minutes that felt like hours, the attacks thinned. Some fighters had gone to harass the main formation, others had spent their ammo. A few may simply have decided a limping gunship wasn't worth more risk. The German coast slid under the wings. Then the gray-green channel. The YB-40 reached England low and alone, trailing smoke, dented and scorched. Fire trucks chased it down the runway at Alconbury as it thumped onto the concrete and rolled to a stop. Under the wing, looking at flak holes and cannon scars, someone said what many were thinking. If that had been a regular fort, it wouldn't be here. They were probably right. The 16 guns and extra armor had done their job. But in the cold logic of planning, another truth was just as clear. An escort that can't stay with what it's escorting isn't an escort. It's another liability. The YB-40's frontline career was brief. Only a couple dozen were built. They flew a handful of combat missions in the summer of 1943. Crews claimed some German fighters destroyed, and when pressed, the gunships could be ferocious. But mission reports kept repeating the same verdict: too heavy, too slow once the other bombers had dropped their loads, too prone to falling behind. By late 1943, the program was essentially over. Long-range escorts, especially the P-51 Mustang, were arriving in numbers. They could do what the YB-40 had been meant to do. With speed and flexibility a lumbering gunship could never match. The YB-40 didn't vanish without leaving a trace, though. Engineers folded its lessons back into the standard B-17 line. The chin turret that proved so valuable against head-on attacks became a defining feature of the B-17G. Improved waist gun mounts and smarter armor placement also traced their origins to the gunship project. Every fortress that later crossed the channel with a chin turret glaring forward carried a little piece of the failed flying destroyer. In the end, the 16-gun B-17 was a paradox, the most heavily armed fortress of the war, feared by the fighters that met it, yet too weighed down by its own strength to do the escort job it was built for. That's why most people have never heard of the YB-40. It was a bridge between ideas. From bombers can protect themselves to bombers need fighters and better guns. Stories like this are built on real aircraft, real missions, and real tactical dead ends, even if the crew we followed is a composite of many men who climbed into those gun-thick fortresses and pointed them at enemy skies. If you want more forgotten experiments like this, odd bomber variants, strange escort schemes, ideas that almost worked, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment about where you're watching from and which World War II what-ifs you'd like to see next. Because even the failures left fingerprints on the war.